The soft hum of conversation and the clink of silverware blended into a symphony of elegance inside the Lexington Terrace, one of the most coveted dining spots in Santa Monica. The warm glow of chandeliers bounced off the polished wood, casting long shadows across the room, where patrons, dressed to the nines, sipped on fine wine and exchanged soft laughter. The scent of freshly baked bread lingered, tempting everyone within reach. The atmosphere was a world of opulence, where appearance was everything and expectations ran high. Through the grand glass doors walked a man who seemed, at first glance, completely out of place. Dressed in simple dark jeans, a navy polo, and sneakers that had seen their share of use, he made his way into the space like a quiet whisper. The man was Elliot Bryant, a 38-year-old tech entrepreneur who had just wrapped up a multi-million-dollar deal earlier in the day. His clothing was unassuming, a stark contrast to the luxury surrounding him. He wasn't here to impress anyone, he had worked tirelessly for this moment, and tonight, he sought only a quiet celebration, perhaps a well-cooked steak and a rare chance to savor success. As he settled into his seat, the soft flickering of candles and the clean white tablecloths calmed him. Elliot wasn't here for the scene, but rather to indulge in something simpler: peace, privacy, and, of course, food. His modest wristwatch caught the light, but it was far from the flashy luxury timepieces adorning the wrists of others. With a subtle smile, he approached the hostess stand, where a young woman greeted him, her hair neatly pinned up. She scanned the reservation list, then nodded. "Mr. Bryant, right this way," she said, gesturing for him to follow. She led him to a cozy spot by the window, the best table in the house, where Elliot felt instantly at ease. The ambient noise of the restaurant, a constant murmur of voices and clinking glasses, wrapped around him like a warm embrace. But there was something unsettling in the air, something small yet undeniable, a shift, a change, an unspoken tension. It arrived in the form of Kyle, a tall, lean waiter in a crisp white shirt and black bow tie. His presence loomed over the table with an air of disapproval. "Good evening," he said, his voice cold and sharp, a tone that immediately made Elliot sit up straighter. The waiter didn't wait for a response, and his manner, distant and disinterested, rubbed Elliot the wrong way. He could feel it, that undercurrent of something unspoken. Kyle returned with a glass of water, placing it on the table with a force that splashed a drop onto the cloth. "Ready to order?" His words were clipped, devoid of warmth. Elliot, never one to let such things rattle him, kept his tone even. "Not yet. A few more minutes, please." "Take your time," Kyle responded, his voice dripping with sarcasm, as he turned and walked away. The chill in the air deepened, but Elliot chose to ignore it. He wasn't here to pick fights. As he sipped the water, his gaze drifted outside, to the city lights twinkling below. The evening was still young, but already something was amiss. Minutes passed, and with each one, the sense of discomfort grew. Kyle seemed to glide through the room, effortlessly attending to the other tables, his interactions smooth, warm, and professional. His smiles were genuine, his tone friendly. But when he returned to Elliot's table, it was as though a mask had fallen over him. He was a different person entirely. "Have you decided?" he asked, his pen poised over a notepad, his voice hard and uninterested. "I'll have the ribeye, medium rare, with the garlic mashed potatoes," Elliot replied, his tone steady. Kyle scribbled the order down quickly, barely glancing at Elliot. "Anything else?" he asked, his words still carrying that sharp edge. "A glass of the house red, please," Elliot added. Kyle sighed, barely audible, and walked away. It wasn't the first time Elliot had dealt with microaggressions like this, but the sting of it, the deliberate avoidance, still cut deeper than he would have liked. When the bread basket finally arrived, Kyle nearly knocked over Elliot's water glass, placing it with little care. "Your bread," he said flatly before turning to leave without another word. Elliot sighed, the weight of years of similar moments pressing down on him. These were the small, subtle reminders that some people believed he didn't belong in places like this, and yet it still stung. "Everything all right, sir?" A soft voice broke through his frustration. It was the hostess again, her expression kind and concerned. "Yes, everything's fine," Elliot said, forcing a smile. He didn't want to make a scene, not tonight. But his discomfort was palpable, not just to him, but to others around him. An older woman sitting nearby shot him a sympathetic glance, as if silently acknowledging what was happening. As Kyle returned with the steak, every movement he made seemed calculated to test Elliot's patience. The plate was placed with a loud thud on the table, and when the wine arrived, it was poured carelessly, spilling a few drops onto the pristine white tablecloth. Elliot clenched his jaw but said nothing, determined not to give in to frustration. He thanked Kyle, whose response, a curt nod, was as cold as the air between them. The steak was perfect, at least, but the tension in the room had become suffocating. Elliot could feel the eyes of the other diners, glances cast in his direction, a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. One man, seated across the room, muttered something under his breath, and his wife nudged him, glancing at Elliot. It was the smallest exchange, but it was enough. Elliot had had enough. This night, for all the triumphs of the day, was becoming one of those moments he couldn't simply brush aside. As Kyle continued to avoid eye contact and brushed past his table with a casual disregard, Elliot finally spoke up. "Excuse me," he called, his voice steady but firm as Kyle passed, plates balanced expertly on his arm. Kyle stopped, his expression unreadable. "There's wine on the tablecloth," Elliot said, pointing to the stain. "Could I get a napkin to clean this up?" Kyle looked at the stain for a moment, then shrugged. "It's just a little spill. I'll send someone to take care of it." Elliot's eyebrows lifted. "Someone else, I take it." Kyle's voice was curt. "I'm busy," he said, walking away without another word. A couple at the next table exchanged glances, having overheard the exchange. Their looks, pitying, sympathetic, only made Elliot feel more isolated. He wasn't in the mood for anyone's pity. He placed his fork and knife down, staring out the window, debating whether even finishing the meal was worth it. Time ticked by. No one came to clean the table, no one refilled his water, no one checked in on his meal. It was as if he had become invisible. Elliot turned his attention back to Kyle, who was effortlessly doting on other tables, laughing at jokes, pouring wine with enthusiasm. The contrast could not have been more glaring. Elliot exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He had been through this before, the assumptions people made, the prejudices that had followed him throughout his life. But this was different. A manager appeared near the kitchen, clipboard in hand. Elliot thought about flagging him down, but something told him now wasn't the time to escalate things. Instead, he took out his phone and typed a quick message. "You wouldn't believe the service I'm getting at Lexington Terrace tonight." The reply came swiftly. "I'm 10 minutes away. Don't leave." Elliot smirked slightly, setting his phone down. He wasn't sure what his message would change, but something told him it might just shift the tides. Just then, Kyle returned, the check in hand. "Anything else?" he asked, his tone flat. Elliot met his gaze directly, a hint of satisfaction playing at the corners of his lips. "Yes," he said. "I'd like the check." Kyle nodded and left without another word. A few moments later, he returned with a small black leather folder, setting it down with a quiet thud. Elliot opened it, and his eyes immediately fixed on the handwritten note scrawled at the bottom of the bill. "Dress code is business casual, just FYI." His hand froze as his eyes scanned the words again, then again. This wasn't part of the printed receipt, this was something Kyle had added on his own. A sharp sting of indignation flared, but before he could respond, a familiar voice called out from the entrance, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Elliot!" Heads turned, and all eyes shifted to the entrance, where a tall man in a sharp tailored suit walked in, a broad grin on his face. And just like that, everything changed. The room seemed to hold its breath as all eyes shifted toward him. His gaze was unwavering. What was it about him that had caused such an atmosphere of tension to settle so suddenly? Nathan's voice broke the silence. Calm, yet with an undeniable edge. "What's going on, Kyle?" he demanded. Elliot raised a hand, his tone controlled. "It's all right, Nathan. Just a small hiccup in the service tonight." "Hiccup?" Nathan's eyes narrowed, his voice growing more intense. "I don't tolerate hiccups in my restaurant, especially not from someone like you." He turned to face Kyle, his words punctuating each step closer. "Do you even know who this man is?" Kyle's throat tightened, his eyes darting between Nathan and Elliot. He mumbled something, but no clear words emerged. Nathan cut him off with a sharp laugh that had no humor in it. "Introduce himself?" "Let me introduce him to you." With a deliberate pause, Nathan continued, his voice ringing out clearly, "This is Elliot Bryant. The Elliot Bryant, founder of Bryant Tech Solutions. The company that's revolutionized how businesses manage logistics." The man whose generosity has funded countless community programs. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle in the room. Kyle's face drained of color. Whispers rippled through the room, and the patrons turned to Elliot with recognition dawning in their eyes. Nathan wasn't done. And let me add, Kyle, he continued, his voice thick with scorn, he's not just a customer tonight. He's one of my closest friends. His gaze sharpened. So, tell me, Kyle, how exactly have you been treating him? Kyle opened and closed his mouth, but no words escaped. His breath quickened, panic flashing across his face. Elliot leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the room's gaze settle on him. He locked eyes with Kyle, his voice measured but laced with quiet power. It's not about me being your friend's guest, Kyle. It's about how you treated me the moment I walked in. The real question is, why? The room fell into a heavy silence. The clinking of glasses seemed to stop, the air thick with anticipation. Nathan folded his arms, his eyes piercing. Well, Kyle, I'm waiting. Kyle's professionalism shattered. He stammered, his voice faltering, I didn't mean it. It wasn't personal, I swear. I just thought. You thought, Elliot interrupted, his voice growing sharper, his patience running thin, you looked at me, saw what I was wearing, and made assumptions, didn't you, Kyle? Kyle's silence was more telling than any words could have been. Nathan's jaw tightened, the anger in his eyes now unmistakable. My restaurant doesn't stand for this, he said, his tone stern. Not from anyone, especially not from someone who represents it. He turned to Kyle, his voice cold. We'll talk privately after this. For now, you're dismissed for the evening. Kyle hesitated, his hands trembling as he looked between Nathan and Elliot, but the command in Nathan's voice broke no argument. With his head low, he walked swiftly toward the kitchen, disappearing from view. Turning back to Elliot, Nathan's expression softened, regret flooding his features. Elliot, I'm so sorry. This is unacceptable, and I'll make sure it never happens again. Elliot gave a small, understanding smile, his tone firm but calm. It's not just about me, Nathan. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. You can't let people like that work here. Nathan nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of the words. You're right. I'll do better. The tension in the room began to ease as patrons whispered among themselves, their gazes now filled with a mixture of guilt and curiosity. Some were already beginning to admire Elliot for his composure. But for Elliot, tonight wasn't about winning admiration. It was about something far more significant. As Kyle disappeared into the back, Nathan gestured for another waiter, this one markedly different from Kyle, attentive, polite, eager to make amends. Let's get you a fresh tablecloth and another glass of wine, on the house, Nathan said, placing a reassuring hand on Elliot's shoulder. Anything you need tonight, it's yours. Elliot waved it off, shaking his head slightly. Nathan, I appreciate it, but this isn't about a spilled glass of wine or a stain on a tablecloth. Nathan's nod was slow, his understanding deepening. Then let's make it right, not just for you, but for everyone who walks through that door. As the staff moved to reset the table, murmurs swelled in the restaurant. Some patrons looked uncomfortable, their own biases under scrutiny. Others cast their eyes downward, unable to meet Elliot's steady gaze. I didn't come here to make a scene, Elliot said quietly, his voice cutting through the rising tension like a sharp blade. But maybe this scene needed to happen. Too many people walk into places like this and leave feeling like they don't belong, like they've been judged the moment they step through the door. Nathan's brow furrowed, his voice low but resolute. You're right. And that's not the kind of place I want to run. It starts with holding people accountable. Across the room, an older woman who had been watching the scene unfold stood up and walked over to Elliot's table. Her silver hair glistened under the soft glow of the chandeliers. Mr. Bryant, she said, her voice gentle but steady. I don't mean to intrude, but I just wanted to say how much I admire your grace tonight. You handled yourself with such dignity in a situation that would have made most people explode. Elliot smiled, a quiet, appreciative gesture. Thank you, ma'am. I think dignity is all we have sometimes, and I won't let anyone take that from me. She nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. Well, I just wanted to let you know, my husband and I will be following your work more closely now. Thank you for the lesson tonight. As she returned to her seat, a ripple of applause began to spread through the room. The clapping started softly but grew in volume, filling the space with an unexpected warmth, a sense of unity. Nathan turned to Elliot, a complex mixture of pride and regret on his face. "You've given me a lot to think about tonight, my friend. I owe you more than just an apology." Elliot raised a hand to stop him. "I'm not looking for favors, Nathan. I'm just asking you to do what's right. That starts with making sure this place is welcoming to everyone, whether they're wearing a suit or sneakers." Nathan nodded solemnly. "You have my word. And as for Kyle, he'll face the consequences of his actions. My restaurant's reputation isn't worth keeping someone who can't treat people with basic respect." The sincerity in Nathan's voice was enough for Elliot to believe him. But deep down, Elliot knew this wasn't just about one waiter or one night. It was about something much bigger, about confronting the subtle biases that so many people face every single day.